The morning Patricia Henderson fired up a chainsaw and set her sights on our 180-year-old oak, she didn't just take down a tree, she severed a part of us. Every memory my wife Sarah and I had beneath that ancient canopy, gone in a matter of hours. But roots run deep, deeper than anyone like Patricia could ever understand. And some things? Some things, they come back around in ways you never see coming. I still remember the first time I laid my hand on that oak's bark. Rough, solid, older than anything I'd ever touched. It was the same day Sarah and I first toured the property. We'd been house hunting for months. Nothing felt right. Then we walked into that backyard and there it was. This enormous oak, its limbs stretching wide as if it had been waiting for us. Sarah stood beneath it, camera in hand, sunlight spilling through the leaves like it was being staged for a photo shoot. She lowered the camera, looked at me and said, "James, this is it." Sarah's a botanical photographer. She sees things most people miss. And what she saw that day wasn't just a tree. She saw Sunday brunches under its shade, summer nights with string lights tangled in its branches, a tire swing for kids we hadn't even thought about having yet. That tree wasn't a selling point, it was a promise. We made an offer on the house that same afternoon. Never mind the old siding or the sagging porch. We'd fix all that. The tree made it home. What we didn't know was that we were buying into a neighborhood with an HOA president who saw things a little differently. Patricia Henderson. Imagine a real estate agent with a clipboard in one hand, a citation book in the other, and not enough to do. Her hair was always in place, silver and sharp. Her clothes, designer. Her smile, the kind that makes you double-check your wallet. And she ran the Highland Park's HOA like a general leading troops. Unfortunately, she had her sights set on our oak from day one. 3 months in, we got the first warning shot. I was at my desk prepping for a case when Sarah came storming in. She slapped a letter onto my desk. I scanned it fast. Official HOA stationery. Patricia's signature at the bottom. It claimed our oak was creating excess debris, imposed a risk to property values. It demanded we remove it. 30 days or fines would start stacking up. I laughed at first. That kind of laugh that comes out when something's so ridiculous, it doesn't seem real. "She's serious?" I said. Sarah's jaw clenched. "Oh, she's serious." I should have known better. The next morning, Patricia showed up herself. Clipboard, bylaws, that smile. She didn't waste time. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, peering past me like she was measuring drapes. "You received my notice?" "I did," I said, holding her gaze. "That tree's been here longer than either of us. It's healthy, and it's protected under Denver's Heritage Ordinance. We're not cutting it down." Her smile tightened. "History is lovely, James, but progress can't be stopped. That tree's a liability. One strong wind, and—" she snapped her fingers. "Disaster." I shook my head. "We've had it assessed. It's in better shape than most of the houses on this street." "We'll see," she said, turning away. "The HOA board meets next week. You should attend." That night, Sarah and I sat under the tree, string lights glowing softly, casting shadows across the grass. We both knew this was just the beginning. "She's not going to let it go," Sarah said. I pulled her close. "Neither are we." We had no idea how far Patricia was willing to take this, or how much we'd end up losing and gaining before it was over. Her campaign started slow, quiet. You wouldn't even notice it at first. Little murmurs when people walked by, comments about safety and property values, neighbors hesitating before waving. Then came the photos. One morning I found them stuffed in mailboxes up and down the street. Close-ups of our oak's bark, red circles drawn around harmless knots and patches of moss. Big, bold letters, "Is your family safe?" It was a smear campaign against a tree. Sarah wasn't fooled. She studied the photos, pointing out the angles, the shadows, the deliberate manipulation. "She knows exactly what she's doing," she said, "but she's lying." We called Marcus that day. He's an arborist we've worked with before. 30 years of experience with heritage trees. He came out, gave our oak a thorough check, and smiled as he patted the trunk. "She's as solid as ever," he said. "You've got at least another 100 years with this one?" I got his report in writing. Photos, official documentation, something told me we'd need it. The next HOA meeting? That's when Patricia made her move. She had a slideshow ready, photos of crushed roofs and uprooted trees. "This could be your home," she said, clicking through images of disasters. "The Mitchell's Oak is a ticking time bomb." I stood up, held up Marcus's report. "Those photos aren't from Colorado," I said. "They're stock images from hurricane damage in Florida." Murmurs filled the room. Patricia's nails dug into her laser pointer. "And this oak," I continued, "is protected by Denver's ordinance. You try to cut it down without cause, you're breaking the law." "Laws change," Patricia snapped, "when public safety is at stake." That's when Dave and Linda stood up. They've lived next door for decades. Their kitchen window looks right at our tree. "That oak's been here longer than all of us," Dave said. "Our kids climbed it. Never had a problem. It's part of why we bought our house. Best shade in the neighborhood." Patricia's face froze, but she wasn't done. After that, things escalated. We started getting anonymous complaints filed with the city, our mailbox filled with highlighted copies of municipal codes. Strange arborists showed up at our yard unannounced, all of them parroting the same lines about imminent danger. None of them could show licenses. None of them had the right credentials. "She's getting sloppy," Sarah said one night, sorting through the letters. "Look at the handwriting, all the same." I was about to answer when my phone buzzed. Motion alert from our security camera. Someone was at the tree. We rushed to the window. There she was, Patricia, crouching by the trunk, doing something. By the time we got outside, she was gone. But the damage was there. Copper nails hammered into the bark. Old school sabotage. A slow way to poison a tree from the inside. I took them out carefully, hands shaking with anger. "She's not going to stop," Sarah whispered. This time her voice wasn't defiant. It was scared. I held her close. "She crossed a line, and we're not letting this go." But we didn't know how fast she'd move, or how much worse it would get. The sound woke me before the sun came up. A chainsaw, somewhere close. Then Sarah burst in. "James, they're here!" I was outside in seconds, barefoot, still in my pajamas. 3 men in orange vests had their saws halfway through the oak's trunk. Patricia stood nearby, arms folded, a smug look on her face. "Stop!" I shouted. The workers paused, looked at Patricia. "This is private property," I said. "That's a protected tree. What you're doing is illegal." Patricia waved at one of the workers. He handed me a piece of paper. I snatched it and scanned it fast. Forged. The signature wasn't even close to legit. "This isn't legal," I said, "and you need homeowner consent. You don't have it." "It's an emergency," Patricia said smoothly. "Public safety." "You're trespassing," I snapped, "and I'm calling the police." That's when it happened, the crack. Deep, bone-shaking. They'd already cut too far. "Move!" I yelled, grabbing Sarah's hand. We ran. The workers dropped everything and scrambled. The oak groaned, splintering, and then it fell. It felt like the ground shook. When the dust settled, I saw where it landed. Right on top of Patricia's brand new Range Rover. Crushed it like a soda can. Her scream was piercing. "My car! My $60,000 car!" She spun toward me. "This is your fault. You'll pay for this." Sarah stepped up beside me, already snapping photos with her camera. "No, Patricia, you'll pay for this. You hired them. You cut down our tree, and we've got it all on video." Neighbors poured out of their homes, phones recording. Dave and Linda were already on the phone with the police. One of the workers, pale and shaken, turned to Patricia. "You said you had the permits. We don't want any trouble." They bolted, left her standing there. The police arrived minutes later, so did a rep from Parks and Recreation. They took statements, interviewed witnesses, took one look at the trunk and the rings that told its story year by year. Sarah touched the exposed rings gently, tears in her eyes. "Civil War," she whispered. 2 world wars, the Great Depression, every year recorded here." I nodded, feeling the weight of it all. "We won't let its story end here." Behind us, Patricia was ranting to the officers, blaming us, demanding we be arrested. The officer's tone was clipped. "Ma'am, we have video evidence, witnesses. You're the one facing charges." As they put her in the back of the squad car, I watched the sunlight filter through the broken branches. One last light show from a tree that had stood through generations. And I knew then, this wasn't over. This was just the start. The courtroom was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels loaded, like a storm waiting to break. Up on the screen was Patricia Henderson's email. The words hung there for everyone to read. Find someone who will say what we need them to say about that tree. Money is no object. I want it gone before spring. It was dated 3 months before the chainsaw tore through our oak. It was the smoking gun we'd been hoping for. I glanced at Sarah in the front row. She gave me a small nod, steady as ever. We'd spent 6 brutal months getting here. Months of depositions, hearings, and legal maneuvers designed to wear us down. Patricia had sued us first, claiming we'd neglected the tree and were responsible for the damage to her car. 60 grand she wanted. Her brand new Range Rover had taken the hit, and she was out for revenge. But she made a mistake. She underestimated us. Our countersuit took her completely off guard. And once the discovery phase opened up her records, it was over. The corruption went deeper than anyone expected. Falsified HOA reports, pocketed fines, threats against anyone who challenged her. Years of it, all carefully hidden, until it wasn't. I stood and faced the judge. My voice was calm. Your Honor, this email proves premeditation. Ms. Henderson didn't act on impulse. She planned this. She hired people to do something illegal. And when it blew up in her face, she tried to blame us. Patricia's lawyer didn't even look up. They'd already tried to settle, twice. But Sarah and I weren't interested in cutting deals. This wasn't about the money anymore. It was about truth and justice for our tree, for our neighborhood. The testimony that followed was brutal for Patricia. The men she'd hired to cut down our oak told the court exactly how it went. She'd promised to handle permits, told them not to worry. She wanted it done quickly and quietly. Make it look official, she'd said. Then came the former HOA board members, 3 of them, each with stories about Patricia using her role to bully, manipulate, and scheme. But it was Marcus, our arborist, who drove the final nail. He took the stand with his thick folder of assessments and photos. This oak was valued at approximately $200,000, he explained. That includes its size, age, historical significance, and condition before it was damaged. 200,000, the judge repeated. Yes, Marcus said, but to the community, its value was beyond numbers. It provided environmental benefits, historical context, and emotional significance. Then Patricia took the stand. Her confidence cracked the minute she sat down. She tugged at her blazer sleeve, tapped her pen, avoided eye contact. Under cross-examination, her story unraveled. Yes, she admitted. I hired the crew. I wanted the tree gone. Why? My co-counsel pressed. It didn't fit the neighborhood, Patricia said. Her voice rose. It was ugly, outdated. It lowered property values. So you broke the law? The lawyer asked. She glared. Sometimes you have to take things into your own hands. There it was, the slip. The judge's ruling came down hard. Patricia was ordered to pay $200,000 for the tree, $50,000 in punitive damages, all of our legal fees. She was permanently barred from ever holding an HOA position again in Colorado. The criminal charges for trespassing, forgery, and destruction of protected property would be handled in a separate case. It was over. And yet, standing in our backyard that evening, staring at the stump where the oak once stood, it didn't feel like a victory. Sarah stood next to me, silent. The stump was massive. Its rings told stories we'd never know, years we could only imagine. She ran her fingers over them, and I knew what she was thinking. We need to do something, she said. She pulled out her camera and scrolled through photos she'd taken over the years. The oak in spring, bright green leaves swaying, covered in snow, branches stark and beautiful, kids playing beneath it, summer light filtering through its canopy. We'll make something new, she whispered. And that's exactly what we did. We took part of the settlement and started something bigger than ourselves. First, we preserved the stump, smoothing it down into a natural table. Around it, we built a garden. Native plants, flowers, places for people to sit. We planted 3 young oaks, close enough that someday their branches would intertwine. Maybe not in our lifetime, but someday. The day we opened the garden, the whole neighborhood came out. People we hadn't even met before. Dave and Linda brought their grandkids. Marcus showed up with flats of wildflowers. Even some of the HOA board members, the new ones, helped plant seedlings. People painted stones with messages and hopes for the future. They laid them in a ring around the old stump. It was quiet for a moment. Then Sarah nudged me. Look, up in one of the young oaks, a pair of cardinals was building a nest. I smiled, feeling something settle in my chest for the first time in months. Life finds a way, I said. Patricia had tried to destroy something because she couldn't control it. She saw the tree as an obstacle, but all she did was bring people together in a way nothing else could have. She thought cutting it down would give her power, but it only showed everyone who she really was. Sarah squeezed my hand as we watched the sun dip low, golden light bathing the garden. She didn't win, she said. No, I said. She didn't. Later that year, Sarah had one of her photos of the oak displayed in the local museum. Below it, a plaque read, "The Mitchell Oak, 1843 to 2023. Survivor, witness, home." It made me think about how long the oak had stood there, holding its ground through storms, droughts, wars. How many people had sat under its branches, how many stories it had been part of, and how in its fall it had planted something even stronger, the community it left behind. I don't know if we'll be here to see those 3 saplings grow tall enough to touch, but I like to imagine some kid, years from now, looking up at them the way Sarah did the first time we saw the old oak. Seeing more than just trees, seeing promise, seeing home. Patricia's story didn't end in court. She sold her house, left the neighborhood in disgrace. I heard the criminal charges resulted in probation and fines. She avoided jail time, but her reputation never recovered. The Highland Park's HOA is different now, more transparent, more fair. There's even a committee dedicated to preserving green spaces. Dave chairs it, and every spring, they host a planting day in the garden we built. We call it the Legacy Garden. On the anniversary of the oak's fall, Sarah and I stood there again. People left notes on paper leaves, hung them on the saplings. One little girl asked if the trees would talk to each other when they got bigger. Maybe, Sarah said, smiling. Maybe they'll tell each other stories. And in a way, they already are, because every ring in those trees will hold this story of a fight for something worth keeping, of a community learning what really matters. Some things are priceless. You don't put a dollar sign on roots that run deep. You don't measure a life or a legacy by what gets cut down, but by what grows back. And sometimes from the ashes of loss, something new rises, stronger, wiser, ready to stand for another 100 years, maybe longer.